Multiple explosions are reported to have been heard over Venezuela's capital of Caracas. We're now joined by SABC News specialist correspondent Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, some of these explosions were heard quite early in the morning and aircrafts were seen flying quite low in the air over Caracas. And of course, we know that this is shortly after the U.S. had attacked Venezuelan ships and vessels in the oceans. What do we know about the nature of these attacks, and do we know if they are U.S.-led?
Well, there are now unconfirmed reports that the aircraft that were seen, the military aircraft that were seen hovering over the naval base in Caracas in Venezuela were the U.S. Capability. And therefore, there's a suspicion that this explosion, multiple explosions in different parts of Caracas, the capital city in Venezuela, are linked to the recent hostility that we saw between Venezuela and the United States of America. As you know, that President Trump had indicated earlier on that he will indeed attack if Venezuelan president doesn't leave office, but linking it with the drug cartels, accusing him of not doing much to deal with the problem of that drug cartels. And we saw those attacks of the naval vessels that were in the waters of Caracas and of Venezuela, and now this explosions at night, because when you look at time difference, it's quite late in Venezuela while we are already up. And therefore, many people are saying this is linked to that. We know that there's been efforts to try and mediate this, and leaders in Latin America, including countries such as Mexico and Brazil, pleading with President Trump not to attack Venezuela, because that will send a wrong message and it will lead to instability, security instability in the region. But unfortunately, here we are. And it's no surprise we did that with Nigeria recently, even though we were told that Nigeria was part of that operation. And this one, we know that it is directed at also pushing the president of Venezuela, Maduro, to step down. We know that countries such as the Russian Federation and also China had warned about this move. And also at this moment, you have a Chinese envoy in Venezuela as this is happening.
Yeah. Has there been any word from the office of President Nicolas Maduro?
There hasn't been any word from the president's office, but I've been communicating with the ambassador of Venezuela in South Africa. In fact, he is the one who did send me a message indicating that Venezuela is under attack. He has promised that he will send the communication as soon as the president of Venezuela has issued a statement, and also agreed to give us an update in terms of their analysis. And we will be waiting for the ambassador to do just that.
Yeah. Sophie, I just want us to frame the geopolitical alliances. You mentioned that the Chinese envoy is currently in Venezuela, and you mentioned, of course, the Russian Federation warning about this. Now, both these two countries are quite close allies of Venezuela. In fact, China provides a lot of debt to Venezuela, and Russia has in the past provided debt relief to Venezuela. Another close ally of Venezuela is Iran. In fact, Venezuela, being an oil-rich country in a cyclical nature, does a lot of oil swaps with Iran. These are three of the biggest trade partners of Venezuela, and we also know them to be three of the biggest adversaries to the U.S. Should we be expecting any sort of retaliation from these three countries on part of Venezuela? Has there been any indication in the past that these three countries would be willing to either give aid to Venezuela to help its military fight back to America or defend itself, or that they would be willing to step in themselves?
It is very difficult to factually indicate that, because, you know, sometimes these countries do make statements, but when the action starts or the operation starts, then they don't get involved. A case point is when Syria was attacked, you'd recall the removal of the president of Syria, who has since gone to the Russian Federation or in Russia. People were expecting that Russia will assist, but Russia didn't. But we don't know this time around. And we are correct. There's a strong link between Venezuela and Iran. In fact, yesterday, Iran had indicated that Venezuela has supplied Iran with some armaments to be able to intercept the missiles. Now, here is Venezuela now being attacked also. And we had President Trump warning against Iran. So the next action, we expect the same to happen in Iran, because you know that he did send a message that should Iran kill the protesters, we've seen a huge swell of protests in Iran, and we know that they are being supported by external forces. And President Trump coming out publicly to say that should the leadership of Iran give directive to the military or to the law enforcement agency to attack people and people being killed, he will act. So you can see, I mean, it is the most difficult moment in the world right now, having President Donald Trump in the White House. It was Nigeria, it's now Venezuela. He has sent a message to Iran. So the world is not safe at this moment.
Just exactly, Sophie, I want us to double-click in on leadership. Yeah, I want us to double-click in on the very specific tensions that the U.S. has with Venezuela. It seems to change every time Donald Trump speaks about it. At first, Donald Trump had accused Venezuela of propping up and turning a blind eye to the drug trade crisis. And of course, we know a lot of Venezuelans had fled the country since 2014. About 7 million Venezuelans had fled the country, and many of them have ended up in the U.S. Donald Trump says many of them are bringing in drugs. But when he was asked a second time around what the tension was, he said that Venezuela had stolen American oil and he wants those back. And this is when Venezuela expelled certain operating companies in Venezuela from oil extraction. And we know that they have the largest oil reserves in the world at the moment, and they're right next to Guyana, which also has some of the largest oil reserves in the world. And then lastly, he then framed it as Maduro is an illegitimate leader that wasn't democratically elected in the right way. And so they're just there to help defend the democracy and the people of Venezuela. What is the actual reason the U.S. claims to have tensions and issues with Venezuela?
Many people are saying it has to do with oil. It's a fact. And we know how aggressive the United States of America can be when you tamper with the country's interest. And President Trump, the current president, is quite vocal and upfront about it. America has got interest in Venezuelan oil, and that is it. And this is about it. Yes, you can talk about the drug cartels, you can talk about Maduro being not legitimate, and I mean, we know it's all about oil. You would recall that during my exclusive interview with the ambassador of Venezuela last year, after elections, when they were pushed to try and ensure that the announcement of results doesn't happen, he did indicate that he expects the United States of America to escalate its hostility if President Trump wins election under President Trump, because there's always attempt to get hold of the Venezuela oil. And I think this is what all this is about. And that is why countries such as Russia and China were opposed to this. You would recall now recently they did intercept, the United States of America forces did intercept a oil vessel from China. It had oil in it. And therefore, you can see it's all about oil. But unfortunately, there's no leadership in the world right now. And there's nothing that can be done. The United Nations is very weak. It is as strong as the leadership of member states. And the leadership of member states are very, very weak. We've seen it. And America is doing as it pleases at this moment under President Donald Trump. And as I pointed out, watch the space. Something is likely going to happen to Iran.
And just lastly, it's about 3:30 in the morning in Venezuela at the morning, which means that the city has gone to sleep, specifically Caracas. Donald Trump had a week and a half ago, you'd recall, announced that the airspace over Venezuela is closed indefinitely, meaning that only American aircrafts can fly through that airspace, and any other aircraft would be shot down by the U.S. military. And you said that the reports around the aircraft that's been seen hovering over Caracas in the early hours of this morning is at least unconfirmed at this point to be a U.S. military-based aircraft. Do we have any details just yet? And I mean, on any sort of action around how many bombs were being dropped, and very specifically, if there is any sort of effort to intercept those attacks right now?
It is not clear yet. Information is very sketchy. As you can see, even the Reuters line there, the information is very, very sketchy. We'll know perhaps later today when we get that information. But as I pointed out, the Venezuelan ambassador has promised SABC that he will share information, and we will continuously update the story with the information coming from Venezuela and Caracas, and we'll also try and get the ambassador to speak to the SABC because he's in charge with headquarters.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sophie Mokoena. I really do appreciate it. SABC News specialist reporter.